Hello again, everybody. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. We are back, and it is our May edition as we go through the off-season monthly rather than weekly. We don't get enough questions from you guys to go every week, so we're going monthly. But you could ask us questions. You could do that on Twitter. By the way, my name is Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
And why don't we lead with, instead of ending with, our contact information. That way if people want to turn off the podcast early, as they probably do usually because of me, they can get the information. So you can hit me up on Twitter at Mike36fan, and you are at Chip Minnick, correct?
That's correct. Last name is spelled Minnicch.
So hit us up with any questions you have, and if we get enough of them, we might go a little bit more often. But at the very least, we will be back with a June episode, so you can ask us whatever questions you have between now and then. And usually things don't change too much about that time of the summer, even in this era of the portal transfer portal, Chip. And we can start off this episode by talking a little bit about the transfer portal, because since you and I last talked, there was a dire situation in the Ohio State quarterbacks room, and that quarterback situation has been addressed probably as well as anyone could have expected.
I think you hit it right on the head. In our last episode, that was around the time when Matthew Baldwin had announced his decision to enter the transfer portal. Mm-hmm. He has since announced his decision and intention to transfer to TCU. So I wish Matthew Baldwin nothing but the best of luck going forward. It's closer to home, which kind of fulfills what we had been reading online, was kind of the homesickness aspect. He wanted to get closer to home. He's going to be closer to home. I wish him nothing but the best. And so the Ohio State quarterback depth chart was certainly precarious, I think, for lack of a better word, with Matthew Baldwin's decision. But the decision by Gunnar Hoke to take advantage of Matthew Baldwin's departure and come into Ohio State as a graduate transfer from Kentucky is certainly welcome news by Ohio State fans everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And Hoke is spelled H-O-A-K. It's not H-O-K-E, so we don't have a relative, right?
We do not have a relative. However, he is in line with Ohio State. His uncle is former Ohio State defensive coordinator Fred Puckett, who any Ohio State fan will recall from the 1990s. Coach Puckett was the defensive coordinator for John Cooper, mm-hmm. and not only did Coach Puckett play for Woody Hayes, he coached under John Cooper, but also Fred Puckett's son, Fred Puckett Jr., was a linebacker on some of Jim Trustle's early teams. So you're talking about Gunnar Hoke coming into a situation where I believe, and it escapes me, Gunnar Hoke, I believe his father played for Ohio State. I believe his uncle played and coached for Ohio State. His cousin played for Ohio State. So Ohio State tradition is coursing well through his veins. From what I understand, his parents are season ticket holders. So this truly is the opportunity of a lifetime for Gunnar Hoke to come in and solidify the quarterback depth chart.
Yeah, really a great situation for Gunnar Hoke. It's always good to see a kid who bleeds scarlet and gray get that opportunity when maybe he didn't get that opportunity right off the get-go, and the losses of Tate Martell and Matthew Baldwin opened up some opportunities, and now Gunnar Hoke comes in with an opportunity at Ohio State. One play goes wrong for Justin Fields, and Gunnar Hoke might be starting quarterback for Ohio State University.
Precisely. And let's not kid ourselves that the likelihood that Gunnar Hoke is going to win the starting job, let's face it, that he's coming in, he's certainly behind Justin Fields simply due to a lack of familiarity with the playbook. Justin Fields, not that he is tremendously well versed in the playbook, only having arrived on campus himself in December of 2018, but he has a substantial lead. So it will be very surprising if Justin Fields isn't the starter when Ohio State kicks off August 31st against Florida Atlantic. That being said, with that depth chart, it is in the best interest of Ohio State football for Justin Fields to get as many opportunities to play, but also for the Ohio State coaching staff to provide opportunities for Gunnar Hoak, who played somewhat at Kentucky, and also for Chris Chuganoff, who is the, believe it or not, has the most Ohio State game experience of the quarterbacks coming back. I mean, it's strange to think of, like Chris Chuganoff was a graduate transfer himself a year ago and only had a few snaps against Rutgers, I believe, last season. But when you look at actual game experience as a Buckeye quarterback, Chris Chuganoff is the leader in the clubhouse. So my point being that Justin Fields, he's gonna probably win the starting job, but I would not be surprised if in some of those early season games that Ryan Day and the offensive coaches, if the opportunity presents itself, to give Gunnar Hoak and Chris Chuganoff opportunities to play as much as possible in the event of an untimely injury to Justin Fields.
Yeah, it was really a case of Dwayne Haskins last year getting the lion's share of the reps and the plays, and then of course Tate Martell got in whenever possible. Even early in the season he would get even with the first team he would get a series here or there, and then I think the staff tried to do right by Tate Martell and get him as many opportunities as possible to try to keep him happy, and ultimately that was all for naught. And Chug's got a few snaps, but nothing substantial. So Gunnar Hoak comes in. He's going to be battling Chugs for that backup spot, and you got to expect that this is a team that if Ryan Day's team gets a big lead, that backup's going to be on the field pretty early in the second half to try to get some reps and get them ready in case something were to happen to Justin Fields. But also, if you're the backup quarterback at Ohio State, or even the third string quarterback at Ohio State, you should see the field at some point, especially early in the season when you're playing a little bit of a softer schedule. I think Cincinnati is going to be a very difficult game, but I think the non-conference portion of the schedule sets up very nicely for Ohio State's backup quarterbacks.
Certainly. Florida Atlantic is coming off of a losing season. I agree with you. I think Cincinnati is going to be a much more difficult game than I think Ohio State fans probably want to acknowledge. But the Miami University game, which is scheduled for September 21st, there's another opportunity for the backup quarterbacks, regardless of where they wind up on the depth chart, regardless of whether Gunnar Hoak is second or third, Chris Chuganoff, as we mentioned. I think all three of those quarterbacks, you want to get when possible, get them some real life game snaps, just because it's not so far in the distant past. Now, granted, Ryan Day wasn't here on that staff, but it will be 5 years ago in 2014 when Ohio State fans, we all recall that by the end of the season, Ohio State quarterbacks, we were down to the third string quarterback. So I'm always of the opinion, get your backups real live game experience whenever possible.
Mm-hmm. I think that season went okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll take it. I'll take it reluctantly if you force it on me.
Yeah, if I got to take a natty, I'll take a natty.
Yes.
I can be talked into that. So I think maybe more important than the Gunnar Hoak transfer, which I think is important for for numbers' sake, for the fact that this guy's got live game action at Division I. I think there's two really, really big additions in the preferred walk-on category, and that is J.P. Andrade, who is a kid who was pretty highly thought of and is a guy who could earn his way into scholarship. And then just recently, Jagger LaRoe, who was at Texas A&M, transferred as a preferred walk-on. This is about as well as Ryan Day could have hoped for the situation to go after Matthew Baldwin left and Tate Martell left, and things were looking pretty dire. But this is some actual talent, I think, that he's bringing into the quarterback room.
I agree. I think from what I recall, my recollection of who announced first may be off, but I seem to recall that as soon as Matthew Baldwin announced his intentions about about entering the transfer portal, the speculation about possible candidates on the ozone. I mean, there were numerous names being bandied about. I mean, we even kind of talked about it on the last podcast. Mm-hmm. Well, my recollection was that JP Andrade was one of those names, and he announced first, but the speculation was that Gunnar Hoke was going to be the person who may ultimately take advantage of that transfer portal. So I think it was within a day of each other. I think JP Andrade accepted the preferred walk-on opportunity, and he's, as you said, he had a very prolific high school career out in California. Now, granted, he is not on scholarship. That's one thing that I think Ohio State fans have to recognize, is that he is coming here as a preferred walk-on, as you said, with the hope and intention and goal of earning a scholarship eventually, but he's not on scholarship, whereas Gunnar Hoke is coming in as a graduate transfer from Kentucky, mm-hmm. on scholarship. So it seems likely that Gunnar Hoke, is going to be given more opportunities. As you said, he does have some game experience playing for Kentucky, which JP Andrade does not. You mentioned Jagger LaRoe. That's more recent. Another walk-on candidate, as you said, he is coming from Texas A&M. I may be mistaken, but this is, this kind of seems to me that this might have, like the Mike Yursich, the new quarterback coach, some influence there. Like there might have been some previous experience and previous relationship that maybe Jagger LaRoe had with Coach Yursich, mm-hmm. down in that area of the country. And, just thinking on a purely speculative basis, that Jagger LaRoe has seen the work that Ryan Day has done with Ohio State quarterbacks, knows Coach Yursich, sees the depth chart, and believes that this is an opportunity for him to, if not necessarily earn a scholarship, to be tutored by one of the brightest minds in college football.
Yeah, I think you and I had talked about I think the name that we threw out there was maybe Tommy Stevens from Penn State, as a possibility, and maybe a name that somebody who could come in and help Ohio State and be a decent backup and maybe work his way into that rotation a little bit. But this seems like a really good situation with Gunnar Hoke having some experience, being on scholarship. You've got two kids that come in who are not on scholarship, but if they play well, they could earn their way into that. And right now the numbers wouldn't help them get there the way Ohio State is set up, but certainly it's something that they can play their way into if they perform well. You've got Ryan Day, you've got Yurkic, as you said, and these are guys who certainly can help a quarterback develop, and so there's no reason to think that there's good stock here for the Ohio State coaching staff to work with.
And let's face it, I think the transfer board, the transfer portal, for all of the, if you want to think of it, all of the complaints and issues that Ohio State fans may have with the fact that, in the span of one offseason, Ohio State lost both Tate Martell and Matthew Baldwin to the transfer portal. I think that the days of stockpiling four-star quarterbacks, I think not just at Ohio State but anywhere, I think that's in the rearview mirror. I think that a lot of these kids, they want to see not only on the depth chart kind of where they stand, but also the window of opportunity to progress and possibly get on the playing field. And with some of these players like Jagger LaRoe, like JP Andrade, we haven't even talked about Danny Benatsky, who's a walk-on quarterback at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. I think they kind of see things as this is an opportunity for them to contribute to one of the best college football programs in the country, to be coached by one of the most well-respected minds offensively in Ryan Day, and the possibility of earning a scholarship, moving up on the depth chart is certainly in their mind, and the good thing looking at just kind of with some names in front of me is that no matter what, Justin Fields, he is going to be this year, he's going to be a sophomore. So no matter what, he is for sure going to be playing at Ohio State for the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. Well, Gunnar Hoke is coming in. He's going to have 2 years of eligibility. After this season, Chris Truganoff will be gone. But then that's kind of where you start to, when we talked about, Danny Vanatsky, JP Andrade, Jagger LaRoe, you're kind of, again, rebuilding that depth chart, just in the event of some kind of injury or issues or things of that nature. And reinforcements are on the way. I know that we don't really talk about recruiting to the same depth that a lot of other Ohio State podcasts may, but Jack Miller is the quarterback recruit that is in line to sign for the 2020 class. So it's going to reshuffle the deck again, where Jack Miller probably is looking at it like, okay, well, I'll bide my time for one more year, behind Justin Fields, so to speak, because after the 2020 season, it would seem likely that Jack Miller would be in line to be the starter then.
Yeah, and I think the days of like you said, stockpiling quarterbacks, that's something that's going to be difficult to do. And I think that we're now entering this brave new world where you're going to have to go after like a top-notch quarterback every 2 years, and then you're just going to have to deal with the fallout of those guys coming in. And some guys who have worked their way up in the depth chart a little bit are going to maybe say, hey, I think I can start somewhere else, and they're going to take off. And I think, Joe Burrow was the tip of the iceberg, and I think this is just going to be the new normal.
I agree. And when everything was announced with, I guess you could say, with the Matthew Baldwin transfer and Gunnar Hoke coming in, there was some Twitter correspondence between Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman and myself about, what should the quarterback recruiting strategy be? And I guess you could say that there's kind of a train of thought that perhaps what you do with any any recruiting class is, if you identify the guy that you want, so in this case, like a Jack Miller, for example, just using him for 2020, that you identify him as, okay, you're going to be the guy, you're going to have every opportunity to be the starter after Justin Fields moves on, but we need to take care of Ohio State. We need to make sure that we have depth behind you. Mm-hmm. So we're going to recruit another quarterback, but we're going to try to put some distance between that quarterback and you. So kind of like the train of thought being, all right, identifying a quarterback maybe from Ohio who is good enough to play at this level, but is not necessarily at the same, is not, I don't want to say that the recruiting rankings don't matter, but is not considered to be at the same, upper echelon, if you will, of a Jack Miller. Because you can find somebody who, just the mere opportunity to play at Ohio State, to be on the team, that is sufficient for them enough. Like, obviously that these are the kind of people that they would love to play, but I think that the opportunity to be wearing the scarlet and gray is even more important to them in the long run.
Yeah, I think you have to go after these kids who are they bleed scarlet and gray so much, and they're just so excited to get that offer from Ohio State that they don't mind having to roll up their sleeves and go to try to battle for it. I think that there's this upper echelon of quarterback recruits who don't want. They say, they kind of have in their mind that I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to be the starter. I'm a top 5 ranked quarterback in the country. Consensus, all the recruiting services have me in the top 5, top 10. I'm not going anywhere to be a backup. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take the job. I'm going to be the next guy. And, it's good to have a guy like that if they're that talented, but you also have to have, you have to be protected from just this kind of a situation that Ohio State went through this year. And I think the way Ohio State does that is they put up that wall around the state of Ohio, and they say, all right, we're not gonna promise you the starting job, but if you come in and compete and are good enough and develop, you can be the starting quarterback, even though we're going to be going after high profile guys from across the country.
I mean, you mentioned Joe Burrow kind of being the tip of the iceberg, taking you down, I don't want to say ancient history because it's not that ancient, but when you think of, in the last 20 years, I mean, it's weird to think of, because we're getting to that, to that kind of time frame when you, within the last 20 years, think of the quarterback battle that took place between Justin Zwick and Troy Smith. Mm-hmm. Both guys were from Ohio. Justin Zwick lost the job due to injury. In today's culture, Justin Zwick would be a prime candidate to have entered the transfer portal after the 2004 season. Mm-hmm. To kind of go a little bit further, let's go into the 2008 season when you had Todd Beckman and you had Terrell Pryor, and Beckman lost the job to Pryor after the shellacking at USC. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is it wasn't that Clemson was defeated. It was just simply because the Clemson coaches thought that Trevor Lawrence was better than Kelly Bryant. They benched Bryant. Within a week, Kelly Bryant announced his decision to transfer. So, like I said, I think Ohio State fans, I mean, I include myself in there as well. I think it's wishful thinking on our parts to kind of believe that Ohio State would be immune to this kind of situation. But as we have seen over the last calendar year, just the complete upheaval of the quarterback depth chart. Fortunately, Ryan Day, give him credit, he has solidified it as well as any Ohio State fan could possibly hope. I mean, the idea that, they're going to be able to go out and grab some superstar quarterback, that's not going to happen. I mean, it's just, I think Ohio State fans have to be very thankful that after Matthew Baldwin announced his intention to enter the transfer portal, that they were able to land such a quality individual like Gunnar Hoke, who has playing experience, to come in. It's giving Ohio State's depth chart that much coveted real life game experience with not only Gunnar Hoke but also Chris Chugadoff.
Mm-hmm. And when the team is going out and getting the next 5-star quarterback from wherever it might be, California, Texas, Georgia, Florida, just remember, you never know what kind of gem you're going to unearth, from a little place like St. Henry, Ohio, where Bobby Hoying came from.
Precisely. And Bobby Hoying was one of those guys that, if memory serves, yes, he was, I think he was Mr. Football for Ohio, but like you said, St. Henry is not, it's not a booming metropolis, and I mean this with no disrespect to the good people of St. Henry, but it's, it plays in a smaller division. But Ohio State was very fortunate to have him come in, bide his time behind Kirk Herbstreit. Bobby Hoying was content to, for that first season, platoon the position with Brett Powers, if you recall that. Like I said, we're kind of going back, looking back at it, but let's face it, think of, after Bobby Hoying, the situation between Stanley Jackson and Joe Germain, mm-hmm. That how both quarterbacks handled that. I don't know if you're going to see that kind of quarterback situation anywhere. Just because I think, like you said, these guys, they want to be able to play, and if they don't see that window of opportunity, the opportunity to take advantage of the transfer portal is readily available.
Well, two things, Chip. One, you almost made water come out of my nose when you brought up Brett Powers.
Sorry.
Because I had successfully excised him from my memory until you brought him up, and then it all came flooding back. And the other thing is, where was the transfer portal for Stanley Jackson to leave? Where was that? Joe Germain was he was my guy. I mean, he was my ride or die back then, and there was just no making a decision on that coaching staff on which one was going to be the guy. So anyway, I am glad that Ohio State has figured this thing out and has tried to limit the damage as much as possible. Before we move on from the subject of quarterbacks, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about, speaking of future stud quarterbacks who were committed, like Jack Miller, the 5-star Michigan quarterback commit J.J. McCarthy, who says he hates Ohio State and they lied to him during the recruiting process. He said, "I used to love them, now I want to kill them," which is not how the Guns N' Roses song goes, Chip. It is a little bit different. I think he misquoted Axl Rose there. But what did you make of this? Is there going to be blood on the field again? Is that what's going on? Is this a Kyle Kalis situation?
It's entirely possible. I think both Tom Orr and Gerd kind of on their podcast recently, they kind of had some humorous back and forth about this, because it just seems as though, he who speaks first or taunts first, or I guess you could say tweets first, or whatever, however we want to say first, usually they have to back it up, and it's usually the guys from that team up north have been doing that, and it hasn't been working out well in their like you said, the aforementioned Kyle Kalis, Karan Higdon, you just have just a bad track record. So I understand the idea of hurt feelings, the idea that the young Mr. McCarthy probably thought that he was the target of Ryan Day's recruiting affections, only to be misled in his mind. But I think it would be in his best interest to kind of pipe down on those comments. At worst, learn the fine lyrics of Mr. Axl Rose before you start making such bold proclamations a few years before you even set foot in Ann Arbor.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that's good for the. Wasn't there somebody from Iowa that recently poked the bear with Ohio State too? It was like it kind of came out of nowhere.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think. Somebody was talking about how Ohio State lost or loses to Iowa, and I saw something about it's Ohio State, their record against Iowa, with the exception of the last game, it's laughable, to try and taunt Ohio State fans with like the beating that Ohio State took in 2017.
It was Deuce Hogan,
okay,
2020 commit. First of all, your name is Deuce, as in drop one. So maybe don't talk shit if your name is Deuce. I don't know. Is that the lesson here? But yeah, the last meeting between Ohio State and Iowa was not good, but I believe it's a 7-2-1 record for Ohio State in the last 10 meetings with Iowa, something along those lines. So
right.
Very odd for someone to poke the bear when they're not even going to be playing the bear probably all 4 seasons that they're in college, and maybe twice. I mean, we don't know. I don't know exactly what the Iowa-Ohio State situation is beginning in 2020, but it was an odd move.
I do know that that Iowa comes to Ohio State October 10th. So that is part, to the best of my knowledge, with the exception of this coming season, when who's to say that the Iowa Hawkeyes don't have one of those non-anticipated great seasons, because that's usually kind of Kirk Ferentz's MO, is to have a great season when nobody's anticipating it. Ohio State will not be facing Iowa unless it's in the Big Ten championship game until October 10th, 2020.
Okay. Well, I imagine the next time the teams meet, Ohio State is going to be rather fired up for that game, I would think.
Certainly, and they'll as you would say, they're going to drop the deuce.
Exactly. All right. That is a lot of quarterback talk from us, but I would say that, I would not hate it if Ryan Day and his staff will go out and find the next beloved backup like a Kenny Guyton. Where's that next Kenny Guyton coming from?
Well, they're going to have to. I believe they're going to have to scour the Ohio high school coaches. I think that's probably the best strategy going forward, is to find that Ohio high school signal caller who has the skills that might be raw, that they're capable of playing at. I don't want to say necessarily at like the top of the Big Ten level, but that they're certainly capable of playing, for a Big Ten program, or maybe a MAC program. And when presented with the opportunity of, all right, well, I can be the quarterback for Bowling Green or Miami University or Kent State, or I can be the if you want to think of them like the break the emergency glass in the event necessary quarterback at Ohio State. I think that's the strategy I would take if I was Ryan Day and the offensive coaches, is find that kind of guy.
Yeah, those guys that tend to in recent years have been overlooked and gone to play at the Wisconsins, the Iowas, the Purdues, and that kind of thing. Those are the kind of guys you want to try to keep home and keep them hungry and competing. And I've always thought that the kids from Ohio really they get it. They know what it is to be a Buckeye coming in. It means a little bit more to them, and I think that they work harder. It always seemed to be the case, I think, throughout. If you look throughout history, the guys that came in from out of state that were highly prized recruits, a lot of them had very good careers. But I think the ones that we really remember the fondest, I think, are the guys that kind of came out of nowhere, that were Ohio products that just had that desire to be a Buckeye all their life.
Yeah, I think you're onto that. You're onto something. I think when things get difficult, and they will, for regardless of any position, playing college football at Ohio State is exceptionally difficult. Mm-hmm. And I just think, as you said, the fact that you're playing for the team that you followed throughout your entire life, the fact that you're in your home state, that you don't want to let your home state down. I think there's a psychological toughness to those kind of guys, and that's why I think the proper strategy is to try and find some more of those diamonds in the rough and kind of polish them up as best you can, if anything, just for depth purposes.
Mm-hmm. All right, Chip, why don't we turn our attention to the Buckeyes of seasons past. When we last spoke, we were preparing for the 2019 NFL Draft, and that has since happened. And a lot of Buckeyes were drafted, because that's kind of how things work, and how that's how that things in life are kind of going the way they're supposed to go, is that a lot of Ohio State kids are getting drafted in the NFL. We have a lot of different things we could talk about here, but just kind of give me your overall thoughts about the draft weekend. I was going to say draft day, but it used to be a draft day. Now it's a draft weekend, and kind of, did it shake out about how you expected? Were there any surprises to you, other than maybe the fact that the New York Giants lost their damn minds, and Dwayne Haskins fell all the way down to 15?
Well, we'll put the New York Giants. We'll put their lapse of reasoning on the back burner for the time being, because that could fill up a whole podcast in and of itself. But very happy for all of the players who were selected. I'm also happy for the players who, even if they weren't picked, have signed free agent contracts, because sometimes that can be even more to their advantage. If there was a surprise out of the players that were not picked, and maybe this is just me being such a Ohio State homer that I'm kind of blinded to things, is that I really genuinely thought that even though he had previous injury issues, I thought that Johnny Dixon warranted a late round selection. I'm happy he's signed. Don't get me wrong, but he was the only one that everyone else that was picked, I'm not surprised that they were. So yeah, I think it turned out really well.
Okay, so the Arizona Cardinals, a lot of people for a long time thought Nick Bosa was going to go number 1 overall to Arizona. Arizona, they got a bit of, I guess they paused a little bit when Kyler Murray became available and said he was going to play football, and Kyler Murray ends up being number 1 overall, going to a team that picked a quarterback the previous year in the first round as well. And unfortunately, that quarterback is now playing for my team because they were not smart enough to take Dwayne Haskins when they had the opportunity. But Bosa slips to number 2. But picked a bit of a hamstring pull this week, so that will halt, or not halt, but maybe slow his progress for the 49ers. But I have no doubt that it shouldn't keep him from earning starts in his rookie season. And then you've got that situation at number 6 where New York Giants, everybody thought Dwayne Haskins would end up there. They've decided that Daniel Jones was the guy that they wanted, because when you can go get a Duke starting quarterback over somebody who rewrote the entire Big Ten record book, I think you have to do it.
Yeah. The person I feel sorriest for is, quite frankly, I do feel sorry for Daniel Jones, simply because he didn't pick himself there. I mean, that was the mistake that Dave Gettleman has tied around the collective necks of the New York Giants franchise. I mean, it's the kind of thing where you're going to look back on this and think, how could you possibly select Daniel Jones when Dwayne Haskins was sitting right there? Especially, as you said, with all of the accolades that Dwayne Haskins had accumulated in his 1 year as a starter versus the season that Daniel Jones had.
Yeah, I do feel bad for Jones. This is not on him. I mean, certainly Dave Gettleman has now etched his name in stone alongside that of Daniel Jones. And however Daniel Jones's career turns out, that will be how Gettleman will be judged throughout his career from now on. And in some respects also, it depends on how well Dwayne Haskins does. If Dwayne Haskins, who went number 15 to, ironically, the rival Redskins, if Dwayne Haskins is beating the Giants twice a year, Gettleman's not going to be a very popular guy in New York, although he probably already isn't. But if Dwayne Haskins doesn't get it done, that's going to alleviate some of the pressure that Gettleman is under. But I have learned in only one brief year, do not underestimate Dwayne Haskins.
No, Dwayne Haskins, by all indications, what he's been showing at the mini camps for the Redskins, he is certainly making, turning heads, making eyes wide with his ability. So Dwayne Haskins, I think he's going to be in that starting position, if not necessarily for game 1. It won't be surprising if he's contending for that starting job very soon in the regular season.
Yeah, and it was nice to see that he's not going there alone. He gets to work with an Ohio State teammate over there in Washington. Yeah,
and you want to talk about it's going to be mutually advantageous for both players. That somebody that they've played with and worked with in the past, that they can kind of lean on during those dog days of training camp. When things get to be rather difficult and challenging. That I would not be surprised if it's the kind of thing where Haskins is with McLaurin after practice, working on routes and on the playbook together, just to kind of help kind of push each other through those difficult times.
Mm-hmm. See, now to me that was the only real Ohio State surprise of the draft was I mean, yes, I was surprised that Haskins dropped, and that there were teams that could use a quarterback that didn't pick him. It showed me that maybe working for an NFL team is a job that, if you can get that job, maybe you're not really worthy of that job. I think it's kind of like president. If you can actually get elected, you probably shouldn't be president. If you can get a job as an NFL personnel person, you probably shouldn't have that job. But Terry McLaurin, by all accounts, what everybody was saying during the Senior Bowl and the Combine and all of that stuff was that Terry McLaurin was screaming up the draft board into potentially end of the first round. He slipped all the way to the third round. So I think Washington did pretty well.
Very well. And let's face it, McLaurin, the reason why he was moving up those draft boards is not only because of his receiving prowess, but his exceptional skills on special teams. During the Senior Bowl practices and the Senior Bowl game and during the NFL Combine. So I'm sure that he's going to get every opportunity to be a contributor at wide receiver, but it will not be surprising if he is on special teams units for the Redskins this coming season.
Oh yeah, he will be dressing for every game, because he will be, even if he doesn't make the receiver rotation, which he very well might, he is certainly going to see time on special teams. He's one of those guys that does all the little things, all the dirty work that guys don't want to do. He will do those things to make the team. Whereas, he will probably beat out guys who were much more highly sought because they're not special teams monsters the way he is. They're not willing to do the dirty work, the blocking, and all of that stuff. And I think the Redskins certainly hit a home run with the first first 3 rounds anyway of the draft. Paris Campbell went in the second round, Chip, and he went to the Colts. So, people can drive over and see him. Won't be a long trip. And then Draymond Jones went to the Broncos in round 3, just a few picks ahead of McLaurin to the Redskins. So, a good first 3 rounds again for Ohio State.
As far as Paris Campbell goes, I think he wound up in as close to an ideal situation as possible, because with his speed and acceleration, playing in a domed stadium 8 out of 16 games, I mean, I just think he's let alone he gets to play with Andrew Luck. The Colts are a playoff contending team. As you said, he's relatively close to home. I think Paris Campbell wound up in as good a situation as you could possibly have. Draymond Jones, I will confess, as a Cleveland Browns fan, I was secretly hoping that he would be the next Ohio State Buckeye to come up north on I-71 and play for the Browns, especially because Draymond Jones is from the Cleveland area originally. I think the Browns, with all of their free agency moves along the defensive line, kind of probably knocked down Draymond Jones in their draft evaluations, but I'm sure that he will find a way to contribute out in Denver.
Yeah, just another solid player. I think that taking him in the third round is not a risk. I think that he's certainly slotted in well there, and I think that he's a guy who will make the team and be a contributor. He may be like a rotation guy who comes in certain situations, but he's quick. He's good at getting off blocks. He's good at gumming up the works. I think he'll do well. He can play inside or outside. I think he's shown throughout his career. Depending on what they want to do with him, I think that he should stick. You talked about fast guys on turf, and I think you're absolutely right about Paris Campbell. The thought of him catching a crossing route in Indianapolis on that field and taking it to the house. Well, I think we've seen that before, actually, in that building.
Yes, and I'm sure that the Colts, in their draft library, is like, oh, this looks kind of familiar. Different color, but the building hasn't changed. So yeah, I certainly believe that the Colts, their due diligence, I'm sure that they were excited about the possibility of having Paris Campbell do comparable things for them within their dome.
Paris Campbell has a pretty good track record at Lucas Oil Stadium, and emphasis on track. But speaking of fast guys, Chip, another fast guy going to be playing indoors, Kendall Sheffield going to the Falcons. He has to endure the indignity of being drafted a pick after a punter, but I think he'll be okay.
I'm just happy for him based on everything that happened prior to the draft with that injury, that he was able to recover and still be selected. I think that he probably he was one of those guys who was highly recruited, just as memory serves, that highly touted transfer, came in, and I think the hype never really, the on the field play never really kind of matched all of the off the field hype. Mm-hmm. And the physical skills are there in terms of the speed and I think that the Falcons, I think that they have the luxury of being able to be patient with him, make sure that he's fully healthy. But I think he wound up in as good a situation as he could possibly want.
Yeah. So another fast guy running indoors. He went in the 4th round. And as I said, one pick after Mitch Wishnowsky, a punter from Utah, went to the 49ers to go be Nick Bosa's teammate. Then the Bengals got in on the Buckeye parade in the 4th round with Michael Jordan, and the word is they will be using him as an offensive guard.
And that's not a surprise. If anything, Michael Jordan, I wish him well. Michael Jordan, though, it would be the cautionary tale of a guy that, in hindsight, probably would have been better suited coming back, playing one more year at Ohio State. Obviously, he's going to be making NFL rookie salary with the Bengals. I wish him well, but I think with another year at Ohio State, all of the scuttlebutt was that he was going to be moved back to guard. I think he would have elevated his draft stock with another year in Columbus. But I wish him nothing but the best for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, entirely possible that he cost himself a few $1 million by leaving this year instead of coming back and playing guard for a year, putting a year of guard play on tape for the NFL scouts and GMs. But he will be, potentially playing next to Billy Price. So a nice little reunion for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, Billy Price, I'm sure will do everything he can to kind of take him under his wing. It's not, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Michael Jordan could possibly emerge as a starter. I have to confess, I'm not entirely knowledgeable about the strong nature of the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line depth chart. But I think he certainly wound up in as good a situation as he possibly can. And as you said, with Billy Price there to kind of, take him under his wing, I think he's in a really good situation.
Mm-hmm. Then you go down to round 6 for the next Buckeye who stay on the offensive line. And much like the Dolphins passed over an Ohio State player in Chris Spielman that I wanted them to draft to take Eric Kummerow, they passed over Dwayne Haskins in round 1, but then ended up taking a Buckeye in round 6. Isaiah Prince going there. The Dolphins have not apparently been called for enough pre-snap penalties over the last few years, so they are going to ensure that increases by bringing on Isaiah Prince.
Let's keep the optimistic thoughts. Keep them going, because I really believe that the talent is there with Prince. It kind of showed itself better in 2017 than it did in 2018. As you said, he had the false start penalties and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think I really do believe for all of his issues with false start penalties that you saw glimpses of the talent when he was a junior in 2017, and if he can just I think sometimes Prince's worst enemy is himself. I think just mentally he kind of gets down on himself, and it just kind of becomes this negative cycle that he can't stop or break. Mm-hmm. So I am truly I know that you're saying about like the false start penalties. I'm truly hoping for Prince's sake that he gets the opportunity to work with the new coaching staff. You have to think like that way, is that maybe they'll be able to kind of reverse some of those negative thoughts and get Prince on the right path.
Mm-hmm. You see a lot of guys who, they have the potential in college. They never quite pan out the way you think they will, and then they go on to have productive NFL careers. It really depends on what the situation is with the coaching staff there. Is it a coaching staff that's patient and wants to teach and wants to develop players, or is it a coaching staff that expects you to just show up on day one and have the techniques down and they just want to plug and play? And I think this is a staff, Brian Flores in South Florida. They bring in a coach from New England that coached under Belichick, and I think that there's a high priority on developing players and getting the most out of players in that system. So I think that bodes well for Isaiah Prince.
And let's face it, when, as you said, it's a new coaching staff with Brian Flores, that when it comes to the NFL, that it is a business. And like any successful business, if you can do it with more efficiently and at a lower cost, you're going to try and do that. So I think, getting back to the idea of Isaiah Prince, the talent is there. If he can show on the field what he is capable of, that Brian Flores, he certainly wants to win games. If he can get by with a lower round draft choice, which means less money that is on the salary cap, I think the Dolphins are certainly gonna try and do that. And fortunately for Isaiah Prince, there are other Ohio State Buckeyes, Raekwon McMillan, Jerome Baker on the roster. Now, granted, they're on the defensive side of the ball, but he's it's not as though he's kind of flying blindly, within that organization with nobody that he's familiar with.
Right. He's got some known faces, some familiar faces to help him along. And the other good thing for Isaiah Prince is it's not like he's got a lot to beat out to get in the too deep on this team. The Dolphins' offensive line was not superb by any stretch of the imagination last year. So good luck to Isaiah. As a Dolphins fan, I am rooting for you to have a very productive career in the NFL. Let's go down to round 7 to the Dallas Cowboys. Getting another Buckeye running back. They have Zeke. They had Rod Smith, I think, has moved on. And now Mike Weber goes to the Dallas Cowboys. Pretty good insurance policy for the Dallas Cowboys.
And for Mike Weber, I know that I was saying a few moments ago that in hindsight, it would have been better for Michael Jordan to come back. I do believe Mike Weber made the right decision by declaring for the NFL draft as a running back. There are only so many carries, so many. If you want to think of it like so much tread on that tire that you have, and declaring with a year of eligibility, it was a roll of the dice. But Mike Weber is in a great situation where he can back up Ezekiel Elliott, such as he was kind of originally slated to do when he was a true freshman back in 2015. I think Zeke will probably take Mike Weber under his wing and kind of teach him the offense, the importance of blocking. I think this is an opportunity for Mike Weber to broaden his skills as a receiver, as a blocker, and kind of become that, if you want it, like that guy who can spell Ezekiel Elliott for a series or two if necessary.
Well, I mean, if you're going to learn how to block or catch a ball from an NFL running back, Ezekiel Elliott is the guy you want to learn that from.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's outstanding at both of those things. So, Chip, the Buckeyes had 9 players drafted. Only Alabama had more with 10. Then the next team in the Big Ten was Penn State, having 6 drafted. Michigan had 5 players drafted. Hilariously, had 2 defenders drafted ahead of a quarterback from Ohio State that put 60 points and almost 500 yards of passing against them.
Yeah, I'll say this much, and it's gonna sound like sour grapes as an Ohio State fan. I wonder what film the Green Bay Packers were watching of Rashawn Gary, because
right,
all of the hype. I mentioned it earlier about Kendall Sheffield. All of the recruiting hype never really seemed to match what you saw on the field. And you're talking about a guy who he's got a shoulder issue, and a high school friend of mine was asking me what I thought the night of the draft, of the first round, I should say, when the Packers selected Gary, and I said, I hope they chose well. I just you have to think that these teams have done their homework, but as a lifelong Browns fan, I will tell you that over the last 20 years, a lot of the Cleveland Browns selections made you wonder, what were you doing? So it makes me kind of wonder what the Green Bay Packers were doing with that pick.
12 overall. My wife is a Green Bay Packers fan, and I said, yeah, your team could have done a little bit better, I think, at that pick.
Precisely.
But, so Rashawn Gary and Devin Bush both were drafted early on for Michigan. And, I think in some respects, that was earned largely by the overall team defense that Michigan had this past year. But Rashawn Gary, it was a bit of a head scratcher for me. But Michigan had 5 drafted, and then Iowa had 4 players drafted, and I'm pretty sure all of them were tight ends.
Yeah, that was kind of remarkable that both tight ends were drafted in the first round. Detroit, taking Hawkinson, that he was largely projected to be a first round guy. And then Denver. Coming back with Noah Fant after the trade down. You mentioned Pittsburgh taking Devin Bush, the drop down. But yeah, Iowa, they certainly are going to, let's just say, like on the recruiting side of things, we were talking earlier. Look for Iowa to splash that factoid on every recruiting tidbit that he possibly can when it comes to the high school tight ends that they're going to be recruiting. Did you know that we had 2 tight ends drafted in the first round in 2019? I mean, you'll see that ad nauseum.
Yeah.
I just think, it's a credit to the job that the Iowa Hawkeyes did with the development of both of those guys.
And it's a good thing they do develop tight ends at Iowa, because where are the receivers in that program?
Yeah.
Where are they going?
Right.
So it's Iowa 2, Noah Fant and Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson went to the Lions, and very high. A tight end at number 8 is very. There's a lot of confidence in that tight end if you're taking him in the top 8.
Yeah, I can only speculate that Matt Patricia, being a disciple of Bill Belichick, maybe he's seeing shades of Rob Gronkowski. Here's a guy who is a big physical mismatch, and he didn't want to drop down a few spots, make it trade down. I have no idea if Detroit was offered the opportunity to move down, but everything that I had read online going into the first round was that Hawkinson was going to be kind of around like that. I guess you could say, if not top 10, definitely in the top portion of the first round.
Mm-hmm. And I was kidding about all 4 being tight ends, because Anthony Nelson, defensive end, went to the Buccaneers, and Amani Hooker, a very good safety in college, goes to the Tennessee Titans, where he'll play for Mike Vrabel.
Yes, and Kerry Combs.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you have a chance to go play for Kerry Combs, you got to be excited about that. You got to drink like 6 Red Bulls and then smash the cans against your head if you find out you're playing for Kerry Combs.
Well, that's kind of what Kerry Combs does anyway. So
he calls that Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh goodness. All right. But yeah, other than that, the Big Ten did not show well in terms of getting a lot of selections. Maryland also had 4 selected, and Wisconsin did as well. You have to go down then, I guess, to what Rutgers had 2 selections. But yeah, there wasn't. Michigan State had only 2 selections. I mean, has that shown how far Sparty has fallen with only 2 selections in the entire draft?
Maybe, but I also think there was kind of Michigan State. They had to kind of, if you think back a few years ago, they when they were kind of sputtering, I think there were some team chemistry issues that they were having where they were going after, let's just say like the more highly touted recruits, and I think it kind of threw off their overall team chemistry dramatically. And I think I think that you're kind of coming out of that, I don't want to call it a tailspin, but out of that period. And it wouldn't surprise me if Michigan State, if D'Antonio, now it's largely incumbent upon him to figure out what in God's name is going on with that offense. But defensively, I have tremendous respect for Mark D'Antonio and his staff. So it wouldn't surprise me if Sparty kind of regroups and gets back to more than 2. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's just weird to see Michigan State with only 2 drafted, because typically you'll get more than that just off the defense, or at least that, depending on how old or how experienced the team is. But and then usually on offense, there's usually one or 2 guys that are standouts, either a running back, a tight end, a wide receiver, a quarterback that's sort of in the mix. So it really is surprising. I mean, but at least they're not Indiana or Illinois or Minnesota, who did not. I don't even know if any of them were drafted. I think they might have had 1 each or none. I don't know, but my thing only goes to multiple draft selections, and I don't see Indiana, Illinois, or Minnesota on this chart.
Yeah, it's no surprise about Illinois, that's for sure. I think the results on the field kind of that there's your prime indication for that. Indiana,
Northwestern also did not have multiple draft picks.
Okay, that is, but I think Northwestern, as Ohio State fans will see this coming October, was it 18th? I believe October 18th, that game at Northwestern. I think Northwestern, I think their strength is on the defensive side of the ball, and I think they're returning a lot of that defense. So we'll see going forward. With Northwestern, I think in future drafts, I think the Wildcats will be well represented.
So Ohio State players that did not get drafted but signed on as undrafted free agents. You mentioned Johnny Dixon, who I really am hoping for big things for him. He's a guy who could be a surprise in camp and stick with the team. And Demetrius Knox, I believe. Who am I missing? There's a couple others.
Geez, oh man. So you mentioned Johnny Dixon. I believe he signed with Houston, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that's correct.
And then Demetrius Knox, off the top of my head, that kind of, I'm not sure if I don't believe Sean Nurenberger has signed with anyone, as a place kicker. But that's not
surprising.
unusual.
It's not surprising. I didn't think his career went particularly great, and kickers generally you have to be a really, really good one to get drafted anyway.
Sure. But I know that prior to the draft, he had the opportunity to come up for a pre-draft, I don't want to say tryout, but workout, if you will, with Cleveland, and he has not, to the best of my knowledge, he has not been signed by anybody. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head.
All right, so
Demetrius Knox.
I've got it. So Knox went to Seattle.
Okay.
Dixon went to the Texans, as did Malcolm Pridgeon.
Okay.
And I want to say that's it. I want to say that's all the guys.
So I already mentioned Johnny Dixon. Let's hope that that the knees that he is healthy enough throughout training camp. He's the kind of guy that it wouldn't surprise me that because this is just kind of how a lot of NFL teams operate, is that he plays well in practices that nobody sees, that they maybe get him into a game, maybe in the early part of the preseason, and then kind of on the sly that they'll say something along the lines of, oh, like, it's too bad about your knees, kind of a thing, like to try and stash him on injured reserve, to try and hide them, through the process. That's quite common in NFL training camps. That, for example, I know for certain that, we were talking about, the different Big Ten teams, how they represented or didn't represent in the draft. Tom Brady, when he was drafted, 20 years ago, that he performed so well during the preseason that Belichick, he actually kept 4 quarterbacks on the roster because he was so afraid that somebody had seen Tom Brady play well that they would lose him to waivers. So getting back to Johnny Dixon, it'd be the kind of thing where if he can stay healthy and play well, maybe he can, be kind of silently like push through the waiver process and sign to the practice squad, given an opportunity to further develop himself.
Yeah, I think the knees really are what kept him from being drafted. I think it's one of those deals where teams, even if they wanted to take a flyer on him, thought, let me just use this pick on somebody else, and then maybe we try to get Johnny Dixon in as an undrafted free agent. And kudos to the Texans for being able to sign him.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, Tyvis Powell, I felt genuinely bad for him, but when the opportunity presented itself, he was able to, at the time, sign with Seattle and eventually make the roster. Just because you're not necessarily picked doesn't mean that you're not going to make the team. I mean, there are just, Powell's just one of many players that, wasn't drafted but was able to have an NFL career at some point.
Absolutely. And it's, we of course are rooting for him, because he's a guy that's been through a lot, and he really was an integral part of the team the last couple seasons. And it was, I think, for me, my favorite, and I always said this on Twitter, my favorite play is the throw a deep touchdown to Johnny Dixon play.
Yeah, I can certainly understand why that would be the case. I can close my eyes and when Ohio State, when they were battling Maryland this past season, Johnny Dixon came up with some very clutch receptions that were crucial to that nail biter of a win. So, he certainly has shown himself to be a very dependable receiver. As you said, wish him nothing but the best. And it's just now that you have that opportunity, you have to make the most of that opportunity.
I mean, maybe he's the next Adam Thielen.
Could be. You never know. That's the strange, quirky nature of the NFL.
Absolutely. All right. Before we get into our last topic, I just remembered a name that we didn't talk about earlier, and I just wanted to bring it up because, we talked about quarterback and highly recruited quarterbacks, and we didn't mention Kyle McCord, who is a 4-star, but has been he's been accepted into the Rivals 100 5-star competition this June. He's a 2021 kid.
Yes, and we talked about the aforementioned J.J. McCarthy, which was why he felt jilted and scorned and all of the teenage hyperbole of recruiting, everything that kind of I guess you could say necessitated all of those like I hate you Ohio State comments. So getting back to just to kind of bringing it around real quickly is so Miller's going to sign in 2020. McCord will sign in 2021. This goes back to what I was saying a few moments ago earlier in the podcast was you would think that there has to be discussion with the coaching staff and the players saying, how are we going to create some distance between these guys so Miller can see that clear window of opportunity to start. McCord can see that clear opportunity of opportunity to start. I would only guess that if Jack Miller gets to play in 2020, that maybe there's discussion that, all right, Kyle McCord, we want you to come in and sign in the early portion of the 2021 early signing period, but we're going to the plan is to redshirt you to create some distance between you and Jack Miller. That's purely speculation on my part.
Yeah, it's possible. It's really a situation with the quarterbacks that you just have to be very artful about how you handle it, and you never know how recruits are going to handle a particular situation, and certainly you're looking for mature kids, and maybe that has something to do with Kyle McCord being the pick over the 5-star. But I mean, if you want to get the best players you can, but you can't take all of the good quarterbacks, because all of the good quarterbacks want to play right away. So it's going to require some artful human resource management on the part of these coaches, and it's something that I think is going to be a real test for some coaches, because some coaches are better at that kind of thing than others. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years.
Yes, and I have the utmost confidence in Ryan Day. Even before when we talked about recruiting back in December, and then with the later signing period in February, I always go back to the fact that the coaches who recruit these players, they're the ones who not only do the evaluation, but they're the ones who are going to bear the consequences of those recruiting decisions. Mm-hmm, so
absolutely,
I believe they'll be fine with who they've selected.
Mm-hmm. You have to hope that you're going after the mature kids that won't handle it incorrectly, and but you just never know how someone's going to. I think there's so many people that kind of don't ever expect the worst could happen, or they don't ever expect the disappointment, and when that disappointment comes, you just don't really know how they're going to handle it. So, but I do think that Ryan Day is a guy who I would trust to do it the right way. So we will see. Chip, the last thing that I think we should talk about is the noon games thing. The thing that we're the thing that came out since we last talked was that there's talk that we don't want the boring games on TV. We don't want the games that people don't want to see. We want to pick the best matchups and make sure that those are on television for the most people to see. So that's going to mean more noon starts, I think, for a team like Ohio State, which is a more attractive TV team.
I agree with something that Gerd and Tom Orr on one of their podcasts when they were talking about. I think this is a really good strategic move for Fox, because if you have, for example, let's just say that CBS, they've kind of with the SEC, they've traditionally have targeted their big game at 3:30 in the afternoon, and then you have ABC or ESPN having primetime games at 8 o'clock. So Fox, in their effort to become more of a force within the college football viewing landscape, they have contractual relationships with both the Big Ten and the Big 12. Mm-hmm. And everything that they have discussed up until this point was all of their highest rated games for Fox were the games that they televised at noon. So it hasn't been officially announced yet. I mean, I've retweeted things that I've seen, is that the Ohio State-Michigan game, which incidentally is going to be, as of tomorrow is 190 days from recording, but who's counting? That should be at noon on Fox on November 30th. Other games that I have seen, and this makes sense, is that on October 26th, Ohio State, they're going to be hosting Wisconsin. That should be a noon game because Fox, not only having a lot of Big Ten and Big 12 television rights, is Fox also has the World Series. So that should be I might be Game 6 of the World Series. But my point being is it would not be surprising to see Ohio State kicking off at noon on Fox a lot this coming year.
Well, I know that's good for me. It gives me plenty of time to get my grumpy old Buckeye written, and then have the rest of the day to just chill out and watch other games, or maybe even go out to eat or something. But I don't know. Are you a big fan of the noon game, or do you like the primetime games more? I will tell you this. I genuinely like the noon game simply because being able to kind of with my children are in high school, so for example, my sons run cross country, so by the time their cross country meets are done on a Saturday morning, I'm already home, so in time for that noon kickoff. Now, if you were to talk to me 25 years ago, the person who was out till all hours of the night, or I should say the early morning of Saturday. Yeah, I could see why. I've heard that a lot of the college students aren't necessarily thrilled with this news, but I certainly think that for a lot of these games, like the aforementioned Ohio State Wisconsin game, the Ohio State Michigan game, I think it really is a great thing for Ohio State, especially to kind of be able to, I don't want to say that to write it in pen, but to kind of be able to look at the college football schedule and be able to, kind of think, something more than likely that's going to be a noon game on Fox. I like that. I know that Gerd and Tom, they were both very, very supportive of this decision by Fox as well. Yeah, they don't like doing the podcast at 3 a.m., the post-game podcast, and working on that and getting it up and all that. It takes some time.
Well, certainly. I mean, let's face it. When it comes to, just like they were talking about being on the road in New Jersey for the Rutgers game, and getting home late at night. By the time they got back to their hotel and then driving back from New Jersey back to Ohio, I mean, how challenging that is. That day, incidentally, that game is November 16th. Coincidentally, that's also the same day as the Michigan State at that Team Up North game. So chances are Ohio State at Rutgers, that might be one of those later kickoffs because maybe Fox is going to put in for that Michigan State-Michigan game.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, I think it's going to – if I had to speculate, if there's going to be again, purely speculation on my part, looking at Ohio State's schedule, I would say for a night game, probably I think the best candidate – I'm just spitballing here is probably October 5th against Michigan State, simply because Iowa is at Michigan that day. Who's to say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. We don't know, what Fox News executives, Fox Sports
executives, yeah,
executive, what they may, because it comes down to kind of almost like a draft from to the best of my understanding that Fox, ESPN, the Big Ten Network, it's kind of, all right, well, which game do you want for this weekend? Which one do you declare first or whatever? And that's why Fox for the last couple of years has been able to have the Ohio State Michigan game because they get first selection in the viewing, and we should probably know within the next week, if not the entire season, a lot of the primetime games and probably like the first few weeks of the 2019 season, because traditionally it's usually like by the end of May that you start to see some of that information start to filter out.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, Chip, my sweet spot is the 3:30 time slot. I always like that one for college football. It enables me to, if I did have a late night, it enables me to ease into the day. But as an adult and as my years advance a bit, I actually kind of like being able to, like, if I have something that I have to do on a Saturday, go get it done, get it out of the way. Then I come back, relax for the Ohio State game, and then I can write my column during the, while I've got like the night game on, or whatever the big game is that week. Like I don't know, a Clemson Notre Dame or something, that might be on in the evening that I can check out, and then of course I stay up way too late and watch some Pac-12 After Dark, and then maybe stream a little Hawaii before I go to bed.
You see, and then you wonder, like why you're so grumpy. Like you're staying up streaming Hawaii games when you should be getting, your 8 hours of sleep like any other, like we're kind of getting old, man. It's like you can't, we're not like Gerd, we're not like Gerd who can just, party like it's 1999 kind of thing. It's like you just gotta, we gotta get our sleep. Like the grumpy old Buckeye columns, they don't write themselves.
It's the chemicals in the cheap beer that he drinks. I drink really expensive craft beer, so it's the chemicals in Gerd's cheap beer that keep him young. But for us, it's not.
That's true.
Doesn't happen.
That's true.
But I tell you, when I'm watching football, that's my least grumpy part of the day and of the week.
Well, that's true. That's true. Like I said, I guess as I, since as I said earlier, like with my sons, usually running cross country on Saturday mornings, and most of the time, it's only, like their home course, if you will, is only about a half-hour drive to and from, and most of the time they run in the morning, like they're usually done by around 10 a.m. It's the kind of thing where I can be back and ready to go for a noon kickoff. So that's probably why I'm looking forward to this coming season. And I'd be surprised if Ohio State's not in that noon time slot a lot more frequently than they have been over the past few seasons.
All right. Well, we will look for some late arriving students this year as we head into this brave new world of noon.
Yes.
More noon kickoffs, if it happens, if it comes to pass. But anyway, I think, Chip, that will do it for this episode here in May of the Silver Bullets podcast. We'll try to continue to go monthly in the off season, unless there's maybe some big news that we need to get together to discuss. But I mean, usually, and everybody keep your fingers crossed and knock on all the wood that you have, that usually this is the quiet time of the year for Ohio State football.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, as I said a few moments ago, that probably the next podcast we'll be able to talk in greater detail about the schedule, not necessarily the entire thing, but certain games we'll have an idea as to which games have been announced. And Ohio State football camp season is right around the corner, so maybe we'll get some more verbal commitments. Nothing has been announced yet, but it's looking like the weekend of June 21st is shaping up to be a very substantial recruiting weekend. So that might be that June 21st date might be the much ballyhooed Friday Night Lights for Ohio State football camp. So maybe we'll get some more verbal commitments by the end of June.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that will do it then. We have, by the way, there was one other thing in football we didn't talk about that we just mentioned in passing. My Dolphins have signed Adolphus Washington to a 1-year deal. So that's kind
congratulations. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see. Hey, I'm happy to see. Let's hope that Adolphus Washington takes advantage of this opportunity, kind of like we were talking earlier about the other former Buckeyes that are trying to ply their wares for NFL teams.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of optimism with the new coaching staff, with Raekwon McMillan and Jerome Baker, and it would be nice to see Adolphus Washington find a home, because the Diesel was a very, very good college player, and it would be nice to see him get into the right situation in the pros where he can carve out a niche for himself that he has not yet been able to do in the NFL.
Yeah, the talent's there. Yeah. Just needs the opportunity.
All right, Chip. As we mentioned at the top of the show, we can find you on Twitter at Chip Minnick. That's MINNICH. and tell people where they can find you on the internet and your works.
So I kind of am on a hiatus from writing for the Ozone, but during the college football season, especially for Ohio State football, I do write for the Ozone.net on the Hayes and Cannon section, and I also am a contributor for Athlon Sports.
All right, and you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan, and you can find me as well. I'm the grumpy old Buckeye on the Ozone in the fall, and I will write the occasional feature whenever, wherever that I have time and desire to do so. But it's been pretty quiet on my keyboard of late because I have other commitments and things that I need to deal with. But that's where you can find me. So we'll do it again, Chip, in June. We'll put together a list of topics, get together maybe the third week or so of June, and maybe we'll have some stuff to talk about, and we'll get together and do it then.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so we'll sign off this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast, as we usually do, by saying, Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!